How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all the day? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? Consider and answer me, O Lord my God. Light up my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death. Lest my enemies say, I have prevailed over him. Lest my foes rejoice because I am shaken. But I have trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. May the Lord bless the hearing of his word.
In his sermon, The Season of Youth, John Killinger tells about browsing in a London bookstore and coming across a little volume by Mrs. Leslie Stevens, and it's called Notes from Sick Rooms. And it was a volume of instructions for domestic nurses. And his eye fell on the following passage. When an illness has gone on for some time, the sick person becomes very weary of the things that surround her. She has looked at all the pictures which hang on the walls and at the patterns which ornament or disfigure the paper till she can bear them no longer. The nurse cannot, of course, alter these things, but she can give them a certain change in the aspect of the room. A looking glass so placed that it can reflect the sky and the trees, or if the sufferer is in the city, some portion of the street will be a refreshment to the eyes which have for so long not pierced beyond the narrow boundary of the sick room. Those were the instructions for the nurses. Well, Killinger reflects on that, and he says this: the older pastor will recognize in these words something central to the business of ministry. We cannot remake the world in which our people live, despite all our youthful ambitions. In fact, one of the persistent ingredients of despair over the years will have been a sense of inadequacy to effect any change at all. But one learns in the course of living how to work with the looking glass, to make things more bearable for those who suffer, to reveal to them new vistas, perspectives they've never seen, ways of looking at the world so they can see the world for the first time since they were children. And who knows, but that in the course of making the world look new, it actually becomes new and moves closer to the kingdom of God. Looking at life from new perspectives. That's what the book of Revelation does. It gives new perspectives on things that we already know. And that's exactly what Psalm 13 does for us today. Most of us are tired. We just want to go back to the way things used to be. We're tired of masks, we're tired of unrest, we're tired of politics, we're tired of arguments. We need a breath of fresh air, and how do we get that? Well, our psalm, I think, today gives us 3 handy-dandy easy steps to get that. And here they are. We weep, we recognize, and we remember, okay? Those are your 3 points. We weep, we recognize, and we remember. So let's look at we weep. Last week, I've already said this, we talked about that one of the elements of the Christian life is lament, or weeping, or sorrow. And we in the Western world don't do this well. We try to fix it. We don't want to sit there in that. We try to move on, or we try to get busy so we don't have to think about it. We don't dwell on it. We would rather not dwell on it. So what does it mean to lament then? I was corresponding with a friend recently and telling him of some of my own struggles with anxiety, the things that I've struggled with all my life. And I opened my heart to him. This was written, old-fashioned letters, I type it. but it was sent by snail mail, believe it or not. And I opened my heart to him. Much of my anxiety is irrational, but some of it is not, but it is often there. And when I got a letter back from my friend, most of it was a list of the ways that I can overcome anxiety. If I just apply certain scripture verses to it, it will go away. I've had other people tell me that God doesn't want me to live with anxiety, and so I need to take every thought captive to Christ and believe in his healing. I've had other people try to talk me out of anxiety by pointing out how irrational it is. Now, the truth is, I'm not really here to criticize those approaches because all of them in their way have been helpful to a point. All of them have. But I think that these approaches come from a wrong-headed notion about the Christian life. And it's this, that the measure of the Christian life is how victorious you feel and how abundant your life is. So the implication is that if you don't have these things, if you don't have victory and you don't have abundant life, then you are not a good Christian. I have had so many times in my life where I felt so far from being a victorious Christian or from having any kind of abundant life. And for me, this has made me feel like God was mad at me. Like he was punishing me, or even that he didn't love me. Because after all, I should be living an abundant life. Have you ever felt that way? Well, thankfully, we have Psalm 13. And we have a lot of Psalms like it. David was in a struggle. We're not sure what his struggle was, but his enemies were crowding in on him. They were close to having victory over him. It could have been when he was escaping from Saul, because that went on and on and on for years. He was on the run. He was on hiding on the lam. And it probably got old. And here's the thing that happened to David that I think happens to all of us. When difficult circumstances persist, our tendency is to think that God has abandoned us. We have so bought into the notion that the Christian life is one of constant victory, and this is theology that is preached from many pulpits in the land. It is victory, it is abundant life, and if you're not having that, your faith is bad. And so the truth is we have no category for extended suffering and extended difficulty. But we're in good company because David has the same problem. He was in the pit and he wondered if God had gone away. In fact, that's what he says. He says these things to God, which are actually not true, right? He says, how long? 4 times in the first 2 verses. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all the day? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? Had God really forgotten about David? Well, that's impossible, right? Because God doesn't forget anything. God does not forget about his children. So that's the truth of the theology. He was never abandoned, but this is how David feels. He's just expressing his honest thoughts to God. He feels that God has forgotten him, that he has hid his face from him, that he's caused him to weep and have sorrow in his heart all the day because his enemy is exalted over him. So what do we learn from this? We learn that weeping about bad circumstances is okay. It's okay. We can weep. It's okay to weep because life is hard. It's okay to weep because sometimes there's no let up in the difficulty. It's okay to say, how long, O Lord, when things aren't going right? It's okay. We have biblical example for it. Some of you have been through such hard times. Some of you have had cancer. You have loved ones that have cancer, and it seems like it'll never end. It's been going for a long time. Some of you are lonely and feel completely alone, and especially in a time of pandemic. Some of you are struggling in the pandemic. Some of you are afraid of what sickness might bring if you catch it. Some of you are frustrated with some of the things that you're asked to do when you come together. But the common denominator is struggle. Some of you getting a knot in your stomach every time you turn the news on. Maybe all of us get knots in our stomach from this. But the political struggle is real. If you want to learn something really, truly about the candidates, I would advise you to go look at the Saturday Night Live debate from last night. Very informative, very, very informative. Come on, man. Some of you are tired of hearing from social justice warriors, and some of you are tired of hearing from law and order warriors. Some are struggling with what the future might. Struggle is everywhere, brothers and sisters. It's just there. So what the psalm is teaching us is that it's okay to weep. It's okay to say, how long? It's okay not to feel victorious. It's okay when you don't have abundant life right this minute. In fact, it's part of the Christian life that we might weep. It's a part that I think we've missed. There are three sources of evil in the world, right? There's the devil, and he's active in all kinds of ways to bring us down. There's the people around us, the world, the culture, the things that are happening there. And then there's ourselves and the sin that indwells all of us, that moves our anxiety and our fears and our anger and all these things. And they cause real suffering. And so if we learn anything from the psalmist here, it's that it's okay to weep and to cry out to God, asking him, how long will it be before you show up? What I believe that when we do that, what I believe that actually happens is that we actually put the weight of the problem on him. That's what we do when we weep. That's what we do when we say, how long? We put the problem on him. We could weep and be victims. We could weep and we could go in a corner and curl up. But what he is saying is we weep before the face of God and we say to him, how long? And we throw the problem on him. This is not my problem, God. This is your problem. I do not need to take matters into my own hands because it is not my problem. It is your problem. When will you come? How long, O Lord? When will you deal with this? I'm putting it on you. That's lament. That's weeping, and it's okay to weep. Number two, we recognize. Well, what is it that we recognize? Verse 3, consider and answer me, O Lord my God. Light up my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death. Lest my enemies say, I have prevailed over him. Lest my foes rejoice because I am shaken. We simply recognize that the only way out of our predicament is God himself. You can take things into your own hands if you want, but the only way out of the predicament is God himself. Our enemies may prevail over us. Cancer may get us. It may kill us. Conflict may surround us. The pandemic may go on for years and years. Mask wearing might last for a long time. Uncertainty will most certainly be with us as long as we're on this earth. And what will we do with that? Will we get angry with one another? Will we take matters into our own hands and figure out our own solutions? As I said before, will we play the victim? Or will we do what David does here? He pleads with God because it is only God that can solve his problem. So what is his biggest problem? Was it that his enemies were about to gain victory over him? Could our biggest problem be that the pandemic is just bothering us? Could our biggest problem be our health or whatever circumstances are surrounding us? I don't think so. I don't think that his enemies was his biggest problem or were his biggest problem. David was a man of war. He was used to conflict and difficulty. David's biggest need was not to triumph over his enemies. His biggest need was to know that God had not forgotten him. What had him so demoralized was that he felt as if God had walked away from him. And that's why he says, light up my eyes. This isn't a cry for victory over his enemies. It's a cry that God would infuse his soul with hope. The idea from the Hebrew is to be invigorated, or actually to bring his soul back to life. To bring his soul back to life. It is to have hope again that God has considered your situation and that he is there with you in the fight. That's his biggest need. I was the youngest of three boys. And it's interesting that I have 6 guys in 9th and 10th grade that I hang out with on Sunday nights. And none of them are the youngest. And I infuse them with what it's like to be the youngest. So I lecture them on a regular basis because I get that. Now, I was a pain in the neck too, so, the youngest often is. But I was the youngest of 3 boys, and so I was always and often hanging out with boys that were older than I was. And some of that was good, but a lot of that was bad because we were on our own a lot. And I went through many, many experiences. This was in Chile. Many experiences where I felt very vulnerable and I didn't feel safe. My oldest brother was in charge. That wasn't good. He's apologized to me so many times since then, but man, it wasn't that good. I felt unsafe. That's the biggest memory I have from my childhood. And this has led to a whole lot of anxiety. When things seem out of control, and when things seem out of control, it's those feelings from childhood that lift their ugly head, they rear their ugly head. Now, fast forward to this past summer when we went up to Minnesota to visit our daughter and her family. And somebody had recommended to me a book called The Healing Prayer. And so every afternoon, when my grandson went down for a nap, I'd go out to this lake, which was right near their house. And I would spend a couple hours there. I did it every single day, I think, for the 2 weeks we were there, almost every day. And I worked my way through that book, and I spent time in silence before God. And the long and the short of it was that I began to remember some of those situations where I felt completely volatile. And I wept through them. And one of the questions I began to ask was, where were you, Lord? Where were you when I was going through that? Where in the world were you? You were out of action. You were gone. You were not there. And as I sat there in silence, it wasn't that long. And this is pretty good for a Presbyterian. It wasn't that long before I felt this impression I felt him impress me with this thought: I was there the whole time. It could have been worse. I protected you. And I wept, and I wept, and I wept. He said, I never left you. And what you went through was designed to bring you to this point. So what happened? I got exactly what the psalm was saying. He lit up my eyes. Hope flooded my soul. Healing came crashing in. My soul came back to life. Why? Was it because my circumstances had changed? That something magical had happened? That God had done massive miracles around me so that I would never fear again or be anxious again? No, it wasn't that at all. It was because I knew he had not abandoned me. He had not walked away from me. Isn't that one of the biggest issues that we have? We feel like we're alone and God has walked away. Where are you, oh God? How long will you turn your face from me? Isn't that how we feel? You're alone. You have to handle this by yourself because God is not there, and yet he impressed me. He was there all along. That is what it is to have your eyes lit up. But brothers and sisters, this kind of realization doesn't come unless you weep first. The mourning will last for a night, but joy comes in the morning. You have turned my mourning into dancing. This is what it is. Well, I mourned for almost 60 years. That's a long time. Still have mourning times. Still have times of weeping. But isn't that all of us? We live in a society. We live in a difficult place. We live in struggle. So we should weep and say, how long? Light up my eyes so that I can see you. But the third thing we need to do is to remember. So what are we to remember? Well, the last two verses, all they are is about grace. It's just about grace. Grace upon grace upon grace upon grace upon grace. Verse 5, but I have trusted in your steadfast love. That's the love. That's the word hesed. My son-in-law has tattooed that on his arm. Or I don't remember where he has it. Somewhere on his body. Hesed. That's God's devout, abundant, never-ending, overwhelmingly faithful love. That's what that is. But I have trusted in your hesed. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. When he lights up your eyes, all you can do is rejoice. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. David just had to remember what his life was like. He had been rescued time and time and time again. You remember when he was out with the sheep, he said he was able to overcome the bear and the lion because God was with him. And then when he was only 17 years old, he was able to stand up to Goliath and kill this massive giant. And then he had victory after victory after victory in war. He had seen God show up time and time and time again. He had to just remember how great God was, how strong was his grace. He had dealt bountifully with him. That's the thing about our God. He deals bountifully with us, and we forget. Isn't this our biggest issue? We feel like we're alone in the world, as I've said, even with people around us, but we feel that no one understands us or understands our struggles. We feel abandoned, but it's actually the opposite. It's the opposite. See, he has never, ever abandoned us. Why? Because he abandoned his son on the cross for us. We certainly deserve to be abandoned. But instead of abandoning us, he sends his son, and then he turns his back on him and makes him suffer the indignities of hell, the pain. He experienced the wrath against evil that we deserved. He was abandoned so that we would be abandoned. In Disney's animated movie Toy Story, I'm sure many of you have seen that, Woody, the cowboy, confronts Buzz Lightyear, who is the toy astronaut, with the fact that he is only an action figure and not really a space hero. So early in the movie, Woody shouts, "You're not a space ranger, you're an action figure, a child's plaything." Ouch. That hurt Buzz. But only after failing to fly, Buzz realizes the truth of Woody's statement, and he's grief-stricken, and he's disillusioned, and he hangs his head in resignation, and he declares, "I'm just a stupid little insignificant toy." But then Woody tries to comfort his friend, and he underscores the love of the boy who owns both of them. He says this, "You must not be thinking clearly. Look over in that house. There's a kid who thinks you're the greatest, and it's not because you're a space ranger, it's because you're his." And Buzz lifted his foot, and he sees the label affixed to the bottom of his little shoe. In black permanent ink is the name of the little boy to whom he belongs. And seeing the image of his owner, Buzz breaks into a smile and takes on a new determination. Brothers and sisters, we have his name written on us. Jesus went to a cross so that he could write his name on us. We belong to him. We will never be abandoned by him. So we can weep and we can wail and we can say how long, and we can say all kinds of things that perhaps aren't true, but we're saying them to him because we know we belong to him, and we know he will never reject us. He will never run from us, and we can wait on him. We are his. We've been purchased by the blood of his dear son, and we will never be rejected. That's the gospel, and it changes everything. Let's pray.